Good afternoon and welcome to the Francis Bacon Society's Summer Lecture. It's a great pleasure to introduce Peter Dawkins, founder and principal of the Francis Bacon Research Trust. Today's talk is on the Gemini Shakespeare Monument. Now, this is the third and last of 3 talks about the Shakespeare monuments. The first and second talks are already available on YouTube. Thank you. Peter.
Hello everybody, it's really nice to be invited again here. And I'm going to complete the series of 3 talks. And as it's introduced, I'm going to talk about the Shakespeare Monument at Stratford-upon-Avon. And I'm calling it the Gemini Shakespeare Monument for a reason. It was erected in Holy Trinity Church in Stratford-upon-Avon. It's not far from where I live. And so I've been to see it quite a lot over the years. But it's actually very, very special, and it's got deep things in it which most people miss. They go in, thousands of people visit it every year, and they go in, look at it, pass by and move on. And so they miss a lot of what's actually there. And like all these Shakespeare things to do with Bacon and Rosicrucians, it's imbued with a lot of symbolism, and some of it's actually very obvious, but people don't see it. It's just very strange. I don't think they even read the wording. Anyway, it was erected between 1620, sort of round about that time. It's a guesswork, really. It was up there before the Shakespeare Folio was erected. And if you look at it carefully, it does in fact declare there were 2 Shakespeares, the immortal author and the mortal actor, and they're tied together in a working relationship as well as a symbolic one. So that's what I'm going to try and introduce you to in this. This was erected in the 17th century, and a century later, these other 2 monuments were put up in the 18th century to make it absolutely clear that Shakespeare is 2 twins. Not just 1, but 2. But the Stratford Monument puts it all together in 1 monument. In the 18th century, they realised people weren't getting it, so they made 2 monuments, and it's still not got yet. But it actually takes us deep into the mysteries of everything. I'll start with a bit of background history to it, and then we'll go deeper into it gradually. It was erected the monument was erected sometime after the death of William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon, who died in 1616, and before the first folio of Shakespeare's plays were published in 1623, and the rough guess is around about 1620 it went up. But no one seems to know who erected the monument or who paid for it, and there is no evidence at all that Shakespeare's family had anything to do with it. Now, during this talk, I'm going to refer to the actor as Shakespeare, because that's how he always signed his name and how it appears in documents and his wills at the time. So just distinguish Shakespeare from Shakespeare, the actual author. But the 2, of course, when you pronounce the names in those days, they would all sound the same, probably. Now, the monument wasn't noticed by anyone, but it's first mentioned when the Shakespeare Folio came out in 1623, and there's actually a mention of the monument in it. And certain wording also associates Shakespeare not just with the monument, but also with a river Avon. So if we look at the folio, you've got Ben Jonson in his eulogy to the author, refers to the author, Mr. William Shakespeare, as the sweet swan of Avon. So that's a kind of starter. Sweet swan, of course, is the symbol of a poet and so on. And Avon, there are several river Avons in England. So which river Avon is it going to be? But then there's a later poem in the folio, another eulogy, called Upon the Lines and Life of the Famous Scenic Poet, Master William Shakespeare, by somebody called Leonard Digges. And it refers to the Stratford Monument, commemorating Shakespeare. I'm just going to read this a bit. Shakespeare, at length thy pious fellows give the world thy works, by which outlive thy tomb, thy name must, when that stone is rent, and time dissolves thy Stratford monument. Here we alive shall view thee still. So this, you put the Avon together with the Stratford together, you get very easily Stratford-upon-Avon. And so you walk along to Stratford-upon-Avon, you find Holy Trinity Church, and blow me, there it is. Well, that's a nice, easy sort of treasure hunt, isn't it? So that's what, of course, everyone's done. And they find this Shakespeare Monument. So why is it important? Well, of course, it's lovely to have Shakespeare commemorated like that, in a monument of that sort. But why is it so extra important? Well, without this association and monument, there would be no proof, in inverted commas, that William Shakespeare's Stratford-upon-Avon had anything to do directly with the authorship of the Shakespeare plays. So this is the primary evidence for associating the actor with the authorship of the Shakespeare plays. And of course it's, if you go quickly at it, you think, oh yeah, well that's it proves, that proves it. But does it? Well, from historical records, we only know that Shakespeare was an actor with the Lord Chamberlain's men, later the King's men, the main company of players who performed the Shakespeare plays. And he was a co-owner of the Globe Theatre in London, where Shakespeare plays were performed for the public. That's known from historical records. However, the Stratford Shakespeare Monument is a lot more than just this simple link. Not only does it challenge the assumption that the actor was the author, but it's a major gateway into the whole mystery of Shakespeare. And that, of course, is why I get excited about it, because it is a gateway. If you look at it, take time to look at it, suddenly it starts to sink in what it's about. Well, the major key really, there's several keys, but the major key to enter into the mystery is the Gemini Myth. Now, the Shakespeare plays and poems and sonnets, when they were published, all signed with this Gemini headpiece. So the top one is on Venus and Adonis, but also Lucrece, which is the twin poem to Venus and Adonis. The first publication of Shakespeare came out as twins, straight away, twins, Gemini. It has this Gemini headpiece. There you've got peacocks, which are an old symbol of the Gemini, but also you see two Pan-like figures representing the Gemini in a sort of higher form as spirits. And then on the sonnets, the middle picture here, you've got the Gemini shown as two boys with wings. So there they are, the heavenly twins, which is what Gemini means, the heavenly twins. And then down at the bottom, you've got them without wings, sitting on two A's, one on an A each, two A's. And there they've got no wings, they're proper earthly, mortal Gemini. So you've got the whole idea of spirit, soul, and body incorporated in that three realms, if you look at that deeply. But of course, there's much more to find in these headpieces than that. But I just want to show you that Gemini is a key thing for understanding Shakespeare. In fact, it's a key thing for understanding the whole of life. In fact, it takes us right into the deepest wisdom teachings of all. Right even back to the Bible. When it says in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. It's not a good translation because the Hebrew is Elohim, which means it's plural. It means we. In the beginning, we created. And Elohim actually refers to the Father God and Mother God. We created heaven and earth. Everything is doubles, partnership, all the way through. So the Gemini, I've given away the secret away straight away, really. Shakespeare and the author Shakespeare is really teaching us the deepest wisdoms and reinterpreting things like the Bible for us so we get to really understand it. In other words, it's a mystery school. Now, in the monument description, which Digges describes, he refers to a sculptured stone monument that's to be found in Holy Trinity Church. And if we look at that, you'll see, just to make it so clear to you, right at the top of the monument, on the architraves, each side of that box with the coat of arms on, you've got the two Gemini shown there very, very prominent. can't you see? Can't you see? You know, Shakespeare's saying this all the time, can't you see? Look, 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 look. The whole monument overlooks a small but roughly inscribed an unnamed stone slab set into one of the steps of the chancel that marks the grave of Will Shakespeare, Gent, as recorded in the Stratford Parish Register of Holy Trinity Church. So it overlooks the grave of the actor. So for most people that makes the association QED, you know, that this is to do with the actor Shakespeare. The sculptor of this, according to Sir William Dugdale's diary of 1653, was one Gerard Johnson, who most likely was Gerald Jansen the Younger, a very famous sculptor. And the body of William Shakespeare, who had been a lay rector of the church since 1605, was buried beneath the chancel floor of the church, where later the bodies of his wife and eldest daughter were also interred adjacent to his. The reference on the monument, together with positioning of the monument relative to the grave, therefore tallies with the death and burial of Will Shakespeare in the parish church of his hometown. And moreover, between the Gemini at the top of the monument is carved the coat of arms of the Shakespeare family that was first granted to William's father, John Shakespeare, in 1596, which William inherited on his father's death in 1601. By the mid-18th century, the Shakespeare Monument had fallen into a bad state of repair. So between 1746 and 1748, sufficient funds were raised, and early in 1749 it was substantially, in quotes, repaired and beautified by the carver Heath, under the auspices of the Reverend Kinrick, Vicar of Holy Trinity Church, and the Reverend Joseph Green, Master of Stratford-upon-Avon's Grammar School, who was both a scholar and an antiquarian. And the Reverend Green, in a letter dated 27th of September 1749 to the Reverend John Simpson, refers to the Shakespeare bust and the cushion before it, quote, on which as on a desk this our poet seems preparing to write. Then he goes on to speak of the two columns and the two painted figures, which he says represent comedy and tragedy. He goes on to state that apart from the replacement of the architraves, nothing has been changed, nothing altered, except the supplying with the original materials saved for that purpose, whatsoever was by accident broken off, reviving the old colouring and renewing the gilding that was lost. Now, despite the evidence of this letter, there's been much heated discussion as to how much work was actually carried out. This is because there are major discrepancies between the various drawings and engravings of the monument made before the restorations and how the monument appeared afterwards, which is how we see it now. However, the overall conclusion, it's my conclusion too, is that the statement of the Reverend Joseph Green is reasonably correct. Moreover, there would appear to be particular cryptic reasons for the discrepancies in these previous paintings and drawings of this. I'm not going to talk about this now. It's a fascinating thing, but I just sum it up saying they show Freemasonic symbolism. They're pointing to the author as being a Freemason. That's what it's saying. They're not accurate representations of this monument on purpose because they deliberately altered it to give the clues away, particularly to Freemasons who in those days could read the symbols. Now the design, the architectural design of this monument is based on classical principles using what is known as the Corinthian order. With its unfluted monolithic columns supporting a fairly plain entablature, the design is not dissimilar to the grand portico of the Pantheon at Rome. Now this is important because the Pantheon, now known as Santa Maria Rotunda, is the most perfectly preserved of all the ancient buildings in Rome. It is described as the grandest of all circular buildings, its circle being based upon the eight-spoked wheel of the goddess Fortune. This analogy is probably exactly what was intended by the designer of the Shakespeare Monument, thereby relating the monument to the Globe Theatre, which was likewise a circular temple, for the same reason, representing the Wheel of Fortune. Then as you entered into the temple, originally there were two statues each side of the portico, colossal statues of the Emperor Augustus and the Emperor Agrippa, standing in niches each side of the entrance to the domed rotunda. Now, it's important because in the classical mysteries, as you go through the entrance, you go between two pillars, and here the pillars are being represented by these two emperors, Roman emperors called Augustus and Agrippa. Why choose those two? Well, their names begin with a capital A, two A's. So there you've got, again, the signature of the mystery school. You saw it already on that one headpiece. And I'll go back to that. In the Shakespeare Folio Gemini headpiece, you got the two A's. This is an ancient signature of the brotherhood of light on earth. And it has deep, deep meaning. I've traced it right back to ancient Egypt. It was used by the Greeks in their temple architecture and so on like that, and then comes into the Renaissance and then is used very much in publications, come under the auspices of the brotherhood that's called the Rosicrucians, the historical Rosicrucians at that time, which Bacon I think, was the leader at one point. So you've got the idea, the AA, Augustus and Agrippa, each side going into the Pantheon, this circular temple, and it gives this signature. So in some way, this monument of Shakespeare is copying it in a subtle way. Now, the astrological glyph of the Gemini, it's two uprights and a top and a bottom. It's actually representing two pillars with threshold and lintel. That's what the astrological sigil is doing, because the Gemini are represented by these twin pillars as you go into a temple. And it's used over and over again in classical architecture and in the Renaissance architecture and symbolism like Shakespeare's Monument. So there you can see on the monument, you've got these two Corinthian order pillars representing the Gemini. Just to make sure you get it, they're the two Gemini twins at the top. It's teaching. It's teaching. If you don't get it first time, it'll repeat it again and repeat it again. Now, the Gemini here are portrayed as naked boys, and they're placed on the monument in the position of heraldic supporters. What they support is a marble box displaying the Shakespeare coat of arms, or Shakespeare coat of arms. And these three, the box and supporters, rest on the entablature above the niche containing the bust of Shakespeare. So if you look at them more closely, the two twins, you can see that they're carrying certain things, or their hands are on certain things. Now, when you look at a picture, it's like looking at a person. So the right hand of that picture is on your left as you look at it, but that's right hand of the picture is over there, left hand here, just like in heraldry. So the figure on the dexter or right hand side of the monument holds a spade in his right hand, whilst his left hand rests on the ground. The figure on the sinister or left hand side holds an inverted dowsed torch, that's the torch that's been extinguished, in his left hand, whilst his right hand rests on a skull. In simple terms, these are emblematic of life and death, or of labour and rest as described in Freemasonry. These Gemini are associated respectively with the right and left hand great pillars, Jachin and Boaz, of Solomon's temple. Now the spade has a reference to Adam the gardener, who digs the ground to sow the seed. It's also a reference to St. George, in a more subtle way, the red or rose-cross knight, whose name, George, means the cultivator. So it's making an analogy of St. George with Adam in this way. But of course he's the Red Cross Knight, the Rose Cross Knight, St. George. It also refers to the labour of love in biblical terms. The labour of God is the labour of love, and that's associated with the right-hand side of what's called the Tree of Life. And it's represented at the top of the right-hand side of the Tree of Life by what's called Sephira 2, number 2, called the wisdom, known in Greek as logos, or word, or in Hebrew as Abba, Father. Now on the other side, you've got the inverted dow's torch and the skull. And this, you can see there's the torch upside down, and there's the skull. This, quite obviously represents death, but it's also used in the mysteries to signify initiatic death, the rest that comes afterwards, and the revelation that concludes it. So when you go through psychological initiatic death, you come out of that okay. You get this amazing revelation or illumination. There's also reference to Eve, who's tempted by Satan, leading to death. So she's tempted, she takes the apple, and as you're told in the Bible, therefore she and Adam, who carries along with her, they're going to be subject now to death and rebirth. Death and rebirth, death and rebirth. Whereas if they'd stayed in their original paradise state, they wouldn't have experienced any of that, and therefore would never come to any knowledge of what truth is all about. There'd be total innocence all the time. So there's a purpose in what Eve did. So we owe a lot to Eve. And she represents Sephira 3 on the Tree of Life, which is the other, on the left-hand side to the wisdom, Sephira 2. And known in Hebrew as Ama, the mother. In Christianity it's called the Holy Spirit or Holy Ghost. So it heads the left-hand pillar of the Tree of Life, called Boaz. Now the bust itself, you look at the bust of Shakespeare, it strikingly depicts him with a blank or vacant expression. Now, I've been a sculptor in the past. It's very hard to do that. Of course, your natural thing is you want to make somebody look alive, and get them as you see him alive. But he's been made blank or vacant. And he's shown holding a quill pen in his right hand, whilst his left hand rests upon a single blank sheet of paper laid on a tessellated cushion. The immediate suggestion of this depiction is that Shakespeare is thinking about what to write on the blank page. However, think about it, a cushion would be the last thing to choose to write on with a quill pen. Guess what's going to happen? It's far too soft to surface and would only cause the pen to either blot the paper or even puncture it, or at the best to produce a scrawl. Useless thing to use. But the thing is, the blank page clearly represents the page mentioned in the monument's inscription, displayed below the bust, which states that all that Shakespeare left was a page. Since all that he hath writ leaves living art but page to serve his wit. And then it shows you that page sculpted, blank. Hang on a moment. This is curious because the author Shakespeare wrote a great many poems, sonnets and plays, and the manuscripts of the plays continue to exist after the actor Shakespeare died in 1616, as they were used to enable the publication of the 1623 Folio. So what's all this about? The actors John Hemming and Henry Condell, in their foreword in the Folio, to the great variety of readers, printed as part of the preface to the Shakespeare Folio, they take great pains to emphasise this. I'm going to read you this. It's a bit long, but it's worth listening to this. It had been a thing, we confess, worthy to have been wished, that the author himself had lived to have set forth and overseen his own writings. But since it hath been ordained or otherwise, and he by death departed from that right, we pray you do not envy his friends the office of their care and pain to have collected and published them, and so to have published them as where before you were abused with divers stolen and surreptitious copies, maimed and deformed by the frauds and stealthies of injurious impostors that exposed them. Even those are now offered to your view cured and perfect of their limbs, and all the rest absolute in their numbers as he conceived them. So they're talking about a lot of manuscripts. And even more curiously, Hemming and Condell continue further on to say, who, as he was a happy imitator of nature, was a most gentle expresser of it. His mind and hand went together, and what he thought he uttered with that easiness that we have scarce received from him a blot in his papers. Well, Ben Jonson, who probably is responsible for all the foreword of the folio, refers to this in some writings about the actor Shakespeare that it was found amongst his papers after his death in 1637 and printed in Discoveries in 1641, wherein he wishes Shakespeare had blotted out 1,000 lines, suggesting that Shakespeare had actually written no lines of plays at all. He's referring to the actor. I remember the players have often mentioned it as an honour to Shakespeare that in his writing, whatsoever he penned, he never blotted out line. My answer hath been, would he had blotted 1,000, which they thought a malevolent speech. I had not told posterity this, but for their ignorance, who choose that circumstance to commend their friend by, wherein he most faulted. So Jonson is really saying he didn't write anything. I wish he had done, but he didn't, And then he goes on to liken this Shakespeare, the actor, to the Roman orator Adheres, who had the unfortunate reputation of being often so impetuous and carried away with his words that he would muddle them, burst into tears, speak extempore, and become so profuse in his language that he had to be stopped. And then Jonson gives an example of this, which I'm not going to read all this, but the example that he gives is taken from the Shakespeare play Julius Caesar. And he gives, well, yes, I better read this. He says, and to justify mine own candour, for I love the man and do honour his memory on this side idolatry as much as any, he was indeed honest and of an open and free nature, had an excellent fantasy, brave notions and gentle expressions, wherein he flowed with that facility that sometime it was necessary he should be stopped. Sofflaminandus erat, as Augustus said of Adheres. His wit was in his own power, with the rule of it had been so too. Many times he fell into those things, could not escape laughter. As when he said in the person of Caesar, one speaking to him, Caesar, thou dost me wrong. He replied, Caesar never did wrong, but with just cause and such like, which were ridiculous, Ben Jonson says. But he redeemed his vices with his virtues. There was ever more in him to be praised than to be pardoned. And the example that Jonson gives is taken from the Shakespeare play Julius Caesar, wherein Caesar actually says, No, Caesar doth not wrong, nor without cause will he be satisfied. So in other words, he's showing Shakespeare the actor simply misquoted Caesar, and this is actually a play that's all about oratory. If you know Julius Caesar, it's all about oratory. It's the key thing in it, speaking well. And the author could do that, the actor couldn't. So Jonson infers that Shakespeare acted the part of Caesar and got his words muddled up in a ridiculous way, a mistake that no author of such a play, with its major focus on good oratory, would have made. And in support of what Jonson writes is the fact that all contemporary historical records of Will Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon concern him as an actor or a businessman, with no mention or hint of him as a playwright. Then we got a few words here which are interesting. Where it says sith all that he hath writ. I put shown red box around it. But actually, it means something very different. It actually means behold. It's an old Saxon word, means behold. So really, it should be written, behold all that he hath writ, leaves living art but page to serve his wit. Look again, behold. He's only left a page and it's blank. Whew. So taking this clause together with a blank page, the Shakespeare bust, there seems to be only one interpretation of its meaning, that the actor William Shakespeare has in fact written nothing, so that all he has left living art is a blank page to serve or represent his wit. And then we got the tessellated cushion. That's a beautiful cushion. Now the blank page, which matches the bust blank face of the actor, is laid on covers a beautiful tessellated cushion, such as one would expect to find in a nobleman's house or on the seat of a grand master of Freemasonry. This latter allusion is of special significance as the cushion is depicted with golden tassels at its four corners and a gold cord around it, linking the tassels. In other words, it's what's called tassellated or tessellated. In Freemasonry, the lodge floor or carpet, and the tracing board each have a tassellated border consisting of a cord connecting 4 tassels, one at each of the 4 corners. The tassels represent the 4 cardinal virtues: prudence, temperance, fortitude, and justice. And the whole symbolizes the fraternal bond of love by which all Masons are united. And the symbolism is actually adopted from biblical tradition, wherein the Lord spoke to Moses, instructing him to tell the Israelites to make fringes in the borders of their garments, consisting of a blue ribbon with a tassel on each of the 4 corners, to help them to remember and keep all the commandments of the Lord, and as a sign of holiness. Remember that word. The colour blue, as explained in rabbinical teachings, resembles the ocean, which in turn resembles the sky, which in turn resembles God's holy throne. Within or on each of these is God, the light, the divine love, the grand master of all. This is symbolised by the sun and by the colour gold. Hence the Grand Master's chair or throne, represented by the cushion, is tassellated gold. But there is a difference. It's not a blue cushion. Instead, you've got a red on one side, black the other. Well, this is a symbolism of light and darkness. You know, light is created on the first day and light is separated from the darkness. So you've got the two, light and dark. This is a symbolic representation of it. So it represents this first day of creation where light and darkness were separated. So the symbolism of this seems to be saying that the Grand Master's seat or cushion is covered with the blank page of the actor, implying that the Grand Master, the author Shakespeare, is covered or masked by the actor Shakespeare. All this gives a very powerful hint that the monument is celebrating 2 Shakespeares. The author of the Shakespeare poems, sonnets and plays, who was a Grand Master of Freemasonry, and the actor businessman who did not write the works, but who co-owned the Globe Theatre where the Shakespeare plays were performed, acted in plays on stage, and was a mask for the real author. And as further confirmation of this, complementing the blank page is the blank face of the Shakespeare bust. Now this could be explained away as being the death mask of the actor, meaning that the face of the bust was sculpted from a cast made of the actor's face after he had died and before he was buried. But why choose to represent Shakespeare in this way? Well, it takes us to the Shakespeare Folio portrait poem that's talking about the portrait on the title page. Because presumably the portrayal of lifelessness as well as vacuity is deliberate, for in the verse by Ben Jonson that accompanies and describes the portrait of Shakespeare on the title page of the 1623 folio, Jonson states that the engraver has tried his utmost to outdo the life. Outdo the life. Well, taking the word outdo in its more common meaning as surpass or excel, the passage infers that the engraver tried his best to create a picture of Shakespeare that was better than the reality. Oh well. But in its literal meaning, however, outdo, as in the equivalent Dutch word outdoen, means to erase or efface. So it's do out, erase, efface. Hence Jonson is really telling us that the engraver tried very hard to do out or do away with the life or reality of Shakespeare, a comment which the rather lifeless face of the portrait seems to confirm. So it's very clear, ambiguity is clearly the name of the game, wherein things are not necessarily as they seem. And another word to look at on this page is the word hit. As he hath hit his face. One of its meanings is struck, referring to the engraver's sharp tool striking the brass plate in order to make the graving. However, another meaning is hid, for the word hit is the old past participle of hide, with the meaning hid or hidden, exactly as we find used by Chaucer in the Squire's Tale. Right as a serpent hit him under flowers till he may seem his time for to bite. Put into modern English prose, this means just as a serpent hid himself under flowers until he might see his time to bite. In other words, the author's face is concealed in some way by the picture. And then if you look carefully, of course, you've done, I'm sure you've done this lots of times. If you look carefully, the face of Shakespeare looks as if it's a mask concealing someone else's face. So it can't be an accident, therefore, that both the Shakespeare Folio and the Shakespeare Monument convey the same ideas. Each depicts Shakespeare as a mask, the former an actor's mask, and the latter a death mask. Two masks. One described as lifeless and the other looking lifeless. Then the Shakespeare Monument's inscription also warns us that not all is as it seems. This is where most people don't read properly, unfortunately. Of the 10 incised lines, the first 2 and the last 2 are in Latin, whilst the 6 middle ones are in English. Most people don't read Latin nowadays, which is a shame. But the first 2 lines translate as a Pilus in judgment, a Socrates in genius, a Maro in art. The earth encloses, the people mourn, Olympus holds. Or in a more understandable English order, it would be the earth encloses, the people mourn, Olympus holds, a Pilus in judgment, a Socrates in genius, a Maro in art. So the wording's been deliberately moved around. Now the warning that not all is as it seems is given in the first 3 lines of the middle section. These comprise a command, a question, and a challenge. The command, stay passenger. Passenger means traveller, somebody who's passing by to see things. Stay passenger. And then comes the question, why goest thou by so far? And then the challenge follows that, read if thou canst. So you've got a command, a question, and a challenge. Now, what it reminded me of straight away, and any Shakespeare scholar should have got this really, it's like Portia's interjection to Shylock in The Merchant of Venice, where she says, just as Shylock's about to plunge his knife into the breast of Antonio, take his pound of flesh and probably kill Antonio by doing it, she says, tarry a little, there is something else. And of course that something else changes everything. Absolutely changes everything. So here we're being warned not to read the inscription too quickly, lest as a result we jump to some hasty conclusion and miss something important. It also implies that it's not easy to read whom envious death have placed within this monument and whose name doth deck this tomb. So it is a challenge. What are we supposed to read? And why should it be difficult for us to do so? At first glance, this appears to be not much of a challenge, for the name Shakespeare is clearly given, followed at the end of the inscription by the date in abbreviated Latin of the death and age of the actor William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon. Written out in full, the Latin would be Obiit Anno Domini 1616, Aetatis 53, DA 23 Aprilis, which translates into English as he died AD 1616, age 53, on the 23rd day of April. That is to say, according to the monument's inscription, Shakespeare died on St. George's Day, 23rd of April, 1616, age 53. Okay. But why does the monument record Shakespeare as being age 53 when he died, when in fact he was 52 years old? And may in fact have died on his 52nd birthday. Why? It's a terrible mistake to make, isn't it? Well, 53 is a special Freemasonic number, referring to the angle of 53 degrees in the Pythagorean 3-4-5-sided right-angled triangle. This particular triangle refers to the 47th proposition of Euclid, the Pythagorean theorem that represents the central tenet of Freemasonry. It is symbolic of what's called the carpenter's square, which squares the tri-square or Masonic square. So it's key, absolute key. The 53-degree angle is associated with the statement also that Jesus said, the Father and I are one, which is the ultimate Gemini state of being, the marriage, union, or at-one-ment of immortal and mortal. So all is definitely not as it seems at first. So whose name decks the tomb? With whom quick nature died, whose name doth deck this tomb. And we challenge to read it if we can. The name of the person whom envious death hath placed within the Shakespeare Monument. But although the punctuation is wrong for the obvious solution, the name that decks the tomb would appear to be the name Shakespeare. And the word tomb can refer to a monument commemorating someone who has died, as well as to a vault or a grave containing the body of the dead person. So from this point of view, the tomb referred to in the inscription is this Shakespeare Monument that commemorates Shakespeare. But then this makes no sense of the challenge to read, if we can, whom envious death had placed within this monument. Because the name Shakespeare supposedly tells us who it is. So it's not much of a challenge. And the monument's too small to contain the body of a person. And we're told elsewhere that the body of Will Shakespeare, Gent, of Stratford-upon-Avon, is buried beneath the chancel steps overlooked by the monument. So it cannot be the body of the actor that's being referred to, and it cannot be the name Shakespeare as given in the inscription. Read if thou canst. So one key to this mystery would seem to be that we are challenged to read who is placed in the monument, which implies either reading the words of the inscription or reading the symbolism of the monument, or both. That this is not necessarily easy to do is emphasized by the comment, if thou canst. The second key that follows the first is that in terms of reading words or names, the inscription itself is the monument referred to. You know, because words are part of the text, that text inscription, that's the monument. And then deck, the third key is the word deck, which means adornment or covering. So that which decks the inscription is therefore the first or topmost line of the inscription. A Pilus in judgment, a Socrates in genius, a Maro in art. So this line is the one which confirms that this monument is indeed the memorial to the renowned author of the Shakespeare plays, as no one else warranted such a tribute as is given by these lines. A tribute which is confirmed by the actual poems, sonnets and plays attributed to Shakespeare. Moreover, this line contains 3 names which describe the author Shakespeare. 3 names. Pilus, that's the appellation of Nestor of Gerenia, king of Pilus, who was a statesman, ruler, judge and counsellor, an advisor to kings and princes, and renowned for his legal judgment, his eloquence, address, wisdom, justice and prudence of mind. The second name is Socrates. He was the most celebrated philosopher of Greece, the father of moral philosophy, a renowned orator, an advocate of clarity and the inductive procedure, and the principal instigator of the great philosophies that have constituted the main traditions of Western civilization right up to the modern era. And by introducing moral philosophy, he induced humankind to consider themselves, their passions, their opinions, their duties, faculties and actions. And his aim was the happiness and good of his countrymen and the reformation of their corrupted morals. He was attended by a number of pupils, one of whom was Plato, and it was via Plato's writings that the spoken words of Socrates were passed down the centuries, such that Plato in his writings is Socrates. And the third name there is Maro. This was the surname of Publius Virgilius Maro, better known to us as Virgil, the greatest of the Roman poets. Now, he was a highly learned scholar, a refined writer, and an initiate of the Romano-Greek mysteries as practiced at Cumae, near Naples, where he lived for the last part of his life. His Aeneid is based upon the mysteries, and Homer's epic tales, the Iliad and Odyssey. However, none of these great men is known publicly to have written plays, and the only one of them who was a poet, Virgil, was also a scholar. So why, out of all the great exemplars of classical tradition, were these 3 chosen to be the ones to whom Shakespeare is likened? Well, if you look at the plays, the sonnets and poems, they certainly reveal that the author was exceedingly eloquent, had a strong sense of justice, had the legal knowledge and language of a jurist, had the genius and understanding of a great philosopher, had the education and art of a fine scholar poet, and intimate familiarity with the royal court and inns of court, as well as with the mysteries and wisdom traditions. But from all that is known of the life of the Stratfordian actor and businessman Will Shakespeare, he is not the one who fits this description of the author. But, of course, there was a man who fits that description, Francis Bacon. He's the only man who could fit it. And he's the only one who could have written the plays and who had a motive for doing so, and who was alive throughout the whole Shakespeare period, including the publication of the 1623 Shakespeare Folio. That man was the lawyer, philosopher and statesman who became Lord Chancellor and sat on the woolsack in the House of Lords. Moreover, Francis Bacon not only referred to himself as a secret poet, but also was referred to by others as a secret poet who had renovated philosophy by means of comedy and tragedy. And he was equated with Apollo, the day star and leader of the choir of Muses, and with Pallas Athena, the 10th muse. And various signs indicate that he was a Rosicrucian. And in 1621 he was created Viscount St. Alban, being uniquely named after the saint, not the place, which is normal, after the saint, whom Freemasonic legend claims founded English Freemasonry and was its first Grand Master. And the confirmation of such secrecy is provided by the suggestive facts that Socrates was reputed to have composed various tragedies attributed to his pupil Euripides. And Virgil, according to the English poet Edmund Spenser, wrote pseudonymously under the name of Tityrus. And then just as Socrates was attended by a number of distinguished pupils who were collaborators in his discussions, so was Francis Bacon attended by distinguished pupils who were his collaborators and assistants, whom he called his good pens. And then there are many supportive references, a lot of them from the Manes Verulamiani, which the collection of eulogies to Francis Bacon published shortly after his death, and they refer directly to the inscription on the Stratford Shakespeare Monument. For instance, the description of the author Shakespeare as being like Nestor, King of Pylos, and Virgil, surnamed Maro, is specifically applied to Francis Bacon by his contemporaries. In addition, they acknowledge that Francis Bacon was in his lifetime, like Socrates in his lifetime, the most renowned orator and celebrated philosopher of his country, famous for his use of the inductive process. And the Shakespeare Monument refers to Shakespeare being held in Olympus, the celestial home of the Greek gods and goddesses. And likewise, Bacon is said to be a star shining in the rosy heavens of Olympus, being compared to celestial beings such as Zeus, Athena, Apollo, and Mercury. So I give this one quote. It's too many quotes to give them all, but it's one. Think you foolish traveller that the leader of the choir of the Muses and of Phoebus is interred in cold marble. Away you are deceived. The Verulamium star now glitters in ruddy Olympus. So I'll say this quote again and see if you can pick out the words, special words in this. Think you foolish traveller that the leader of the choir of the Muses and of Phoebus is interred in cold marble? Away you are deceived. The Verulamium star now glitters in ruddy Olympus. So the use of Olympus rather than heaven is not unusual, but the reference to traveller is. So the inscription, stay passenger, why goest thou by so fast, read if thou canst, is pointedly alluded to in this elegy by Thomas Vincent to Francis Bacon, associating Bacon directly and intimately with the Shakespeare Monument. But your fame adheres not to sculpted columns, nor is read on the tomb, stay, traveller, your steps. So that's Thomas Vincent's eulogy to Francis Bacon. So, but got that first quote I gave, which is anonymous from the Manes Verulamium. It refers to the foolish traveller. It refers to the cold marble. You know, think you foolish traveller that the leader of the choir of the Muses and of Phoebus is interred in cold marble? Away you are deceived. The Verulamian star now glitters in ruddy Olympus. And then Thomas Vincent says, but your fame adheres not to sculptured columns, nor is read on the tomb, stay traveller your steps. The tomb, which tomb? The only difference in the specific reference that identifies the tomb is that whereas the Shakespeare Monument uses the word passenger, Vincent uses traveller, but the sense is the same. Because in the 16th, 17th century, passenger was the name for a traveller of a certain standing and substance, as distinct from a vagabond. Now we've got two Shakespeares. It's now possible to see that not only that the first line of the Shakespeare Monument's inscription refers to the author Shakespeare, Francis Bacon, but also that the second line, the earth encloses, the people mourn, Olympus holds him, can suggest two Shakespeares, the actor who is dead and whose body is buried in the earth, and the author who lives on, immortal, in Olympus. So here we have the idea of the Gemini hinted to us, of whom one is mortal and the other immortal. It's a partnership. So the Gemini were two brothers, one mortal, one immortal. They loved each other so much that eventually they united and became one. The mortal, immortal, or son of God, son of man is the other formula for it. Who have we heard called that before? So this is showing a partnership of actor and author, which is outwardly declared by the Gemini figures crowning the Shakespeare Monument. And the word immortal is applied to a poet. Any great poet and teacher was considered immortal. Hence the description of Shakespeare as the ever-living poet in the dedication to Shakespeare's sonnets. And then moreover, the threefold description of the author Shakespeare in the first line is actually the description of Hermes Trismegistus, the mortal who became immortal. As a mortal, he was taught by Poemander, the nous or divine mind, but when enlightened, he became the immortal teacher to his mortal students. So this gives us a further key, opening the door to the Hermetic science and deeper mystery of Shakespeare. So if you look at the second line down in the Latin one, it actually describes the three worlds of Hermetic tradition. The natural, human and celestial worlds which are equated in church tradition with the body, soul and spirit. And then the first line describes the triple greatness of Hermes Trismegistus. So Nestor was a king reputed for his good judgment and advice. Socrates was a philosopher renowned for his universality and humanity. And Virgil was a poet who was an initiate or priest of the mysteries, as demonstrated in his writings. These three analogies are associated with the triple description of Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice greatest master and teacher of the Hermetic wisdom tradition. And as Bacon talks about him in one of his writings, describes him as that triplicity which in great veneration was ascribed to the ancient Hermes, the power and fortune of a king, the knowledge and illumination of a priest, and the learning and universality of a philosopher. So not only do the first two lines introduce the idea of the Hermetic teachings, but the whole of the inscription also does this. Inscription's made up of three distinct parts, which I'm showing you more clearly here. The two lines in Latin that head the inscription, the 6 lines in English that form the middle part, and the 2 lines in abbreviated Latin at the end. So these 3 parts relate to the spiritual world of the immortal author, 2-line heading, the human world of the passenger, traveller or visitor, so that's the middle 6-line body of text, and then the natural world or earth in which Shakespeare's deceased body is buried, the short 2-line ending. So 3 great worlds, the spirit, soul and body, being referenced. And then you've got the whole monument is painted in the Hermetic colours, just to make it, just to ram home the point. Black, white, red. The Shakespeare Monument is built of black, white and golden-hued marble, and all colours or metals painted on it are of the same. And black, white and red are the fundamental Hermetic colours. Their metallic equivalents are lead, silver and gold. And they symbolise the three great worlds of existence, the natural, the human and the celestial worlds. And also it represents the alchemical work which progresses from the black to the white and then to the red state, or in metallic symbolism, from the lead to the silver to the gold or golden state of being. These are the three main stages of human development and initiation. So the whole monument, therefore, depicts the alchemical process of life. And even the coat of arms given to Shakspeare's family are coloured the same. It's comprised of a golden spear with a silver spearhead, point upward displayed on a Ben's sable, that's a black diagonal band, crossing a golden shield. The heraldic crest is described as a falcon with his wings displayed, standing on a wreath of his colours, i.e. black and gold, and supporting a spear headed silver, fixed upon a helmet with mantles and tassels. The falcon's coloured black, parodying the black crested cormorant known as a shag. Its name specially referring to its crest. So the shag holding the spear is an excellent rebus for Shakespeare, which is one of the many spellings of the Shakespeare family of Stratford-upon-Avon. Then, going back to the inscription, if you look carefully at it, the first two lines have got a few large letters in them, larger than the other letters. I mean, they're all capital letters, but a few of them are larger. So on the first line, you've got I, P, S, and M. And the second line, you've got the T and the O. 6 letters in all. The 6th letter in the alphabet is F. And if you count the small letters now in the first two lines, you've got 33 for the first line, and you've got 33 for the second line. So 33 is the well-used simple cipher for Bacon, B-A-C-O-N. If we add the F to Bacon, we have the name F. Bacon, which is one of the ways Francis Bacon signed his letters. It's very neat, isn't it? Simple, very neat. As a double check, 33 plus 33 equals 66, and 66 in simple cipher is Fra Baconi, which is Francis Bacon's name as it's sometimes printed on foreign books of his writings. So it's used in Latin editions of his works. Fra Baconi, meaning Francisci Baconi. So F. Bacon or Fra Baconi, therefore, is the name that decks the tomb, with the Nestor, Socrates, Maro and Hermes Trismegistus descriptions confirming this name. It also harmonises with the fact that Francis Bacon at one time considered using the pseudonym of Hermes Stella for his philosophical works in his great Instauration. If he'd done that, we wouldn't know anything he'd written. The middle section, look at the middle section, the 6 lines in English. In terms of large letters, there are 9 of them. And in simple cipher, 9 equals I, the personal pronoun. So the underlying question of who the real author Shakespeare was is answered simply as if by Francis Bacon himself, I, F. Bacon, or I, Francis Bacon. A very simple cipher signature. And then it goes deeper. There's a Rosicrucian signature. The 8 main lines of text, the upper 2 lines and the middle 6 lines, consist of 50 complete words containing 287 letters in total. 287 in what's called the key cipher, or K cipher, equals Fra Rosy Cross, which is the well-known signature of the Rosicrucian fraternity, but also stands for other things too. It stands for Fratre Rosy Cross, Brothers of the Rosy Cross. It could stand for Frater Rosy Cross, which means brother of the Rosy Cross. It could stand for Fraternitatis Rosy Cross, Fraternity of the Rosy Cross. can also stand for Francis Rosy Cross, as given by Dr. John Wilkins, Bishop of Chester, in his Mathematical Magic, which gives a further insight as to who Fra R.C., the father of the Rosicrucian fraternity, actually was. And then the number 50 is in Roman numerals the letter L, which is used, for instance, in the Shakespeare play Love's Labour's Lost to convey the idea of truth. So love's labour, which is love in action or charity, is 50 plus 50, it's two L's. 50 plus 50 is 100. And 100 is the Kabbalistic number of God, the author of all. 50 itself was the number of the Argonauts, which is a metaphor for those seekers after truth who seek and find the golden fleece of enlightenment. We got this Freemasonic cipher signature. So I put red boxes around letters which are put together, a T and an H, put together in a special way, which is how it's done in ancient Freemasonry. By ancient, I mean modern Freemasonry, but going back a century or two. So there are 10 of these THs put together like that, in two groups, configuration of 4 and a configuration of 6. And each TH has been deliberately conjoined so as to give the signature of the Freemasonic Holy Royal Arch degree, symbolic of the higher Rosicrucian degrees. It's the gateway to the higher degrees, the Rosicrucian degrees. TH can stand for Templum Hierosolyma, meaning the Temple of the Great Solomon, or Temple of Jerusalem, and are specifically used in the Holy Royal Arch degree. And then TH also stands for Holiness Supporting the Trinity, the H supporting the T, because sometimes the H is done with the T standing on top of it. And this represents the holiness. Holiness is the particular quality of the Holy Royal Arch degree. Do you remember where holiness was mentioned before? I have to remember. Holiness is the title of the first book of Edmund Spenser's Fairy Queen, which concerns the Red Cross Knight and his lady Una, who's truth. Una helps to build the Rose Cross Knight into a mighty warrior capable of defeating the dragon that has imprisoned her parents. And holiness is the quality of this Red Cross Knight, the Knight of the Royal Arch. And the Red Cross Knight was the title of St. George. He's associated with Shakespeare by virtue of Shakespeare's legendary date of birth and death on St. George's Day. Okay, well, it's worth looking at it again. Can you see all the red squares I put there? If you count them, there are 10. And these are the TH conflated together, which is done for this special reason. So the TH can represent Templum Hierosolyma, the Latin, which means Temple of the Great Solomon, or Temple of Jerusalem, and is specifically used in the Holy Royal Arch degree of Freemasonry. And TH represents holiness supporting the Trinity, because sometimes the T is put on top of the H. And holiness is the particular quality of the Holy Royal Arch degree, and holiness is the title of the first book of Edmund Spenser's Fairy Queen, which concerns the Red Cross Knight and his lady Una. Red, by the way, in heraldry, is the colour of gold. Gold is the metal, red is the colour. So the Rosicrucians, historical Rosicrucians, were founded, according to Meyer and others, in 1571, that period, in England. And they call themselves the Order of the Golden and Rosy Cross. The Order of the Golden and Rosy Cross. So it's a gold cross, and it's rosy, has the rose with it. Well, it's the gold cross, the same as the red cross. So it takes you straight to St. George, who's the patron saint of England. You know, no wonder they adopted that symbol. But of course, the symbol itself is very, very ancient, and it's very Christian too, in fact. So in this first book of Edmund Spenser's Faerie Queen, his lady, Una, she represents truth, and she helps the Red Cross Knight to build him into a mighty warrior who can defeat the dragon that's imprisoned her parents. And his quality is holiness, and that's the quality of a knight of the degree of the Royal Arch. A Royal Arch degree Freemason becomes a knight, and he's considered to be holy. And TH can also represent what's called triple tau, TTT, because the H is made up of two T's put together, if you see what I mean. So you've got three T's, TTT, and it's called the triple tau. But triple tau, in terms of capital letters, is TT, double T, TT, using the Freemasonic capital letter code. And TT is 33, which is the highest degree you can get to. Then if you look carefully at the very end of this inscription, you'll see these double T's, TT above another TT, making a square. Very carefully done, whoever did this inscription. So in Freemasonry, this signifies 33, third degree of initiation, the ultimate degree of human mastery or enlightenment. And these two sets of TT, or 33, echo the two cipher sets of 33 of the first two lines of the monument's inscription that we looked at. They also represent like this at the end of the inscription, made like a square. In 3 dimensions, that would be a cube. And the cube represents the foundation. It represents the foundation stone of the universe. In Solomon's temple, it's called the foundation stone of Solomon's temple, but that itself represents what's called in the Bible the foundation stone of the universe, a cubic stone that contains all wisdom. And it's associated with the Word of God that creates and founds all things. And it does. I've researched and been taught and learned a lot about it, and it does. And two T's, TT, TT, two 33s, again implies the idea of the Gemini. There's two of them involved. Heaven and earth, immortal, immortal, male and female, and so on. Back to the monument. Shakespeare Monument's memorial to the Shakespeare Gemini, the author and the actor. The author, Francis Bacon, Viscount St. Alban, Grand Master of Freemasonry and father of the Rosy Cross fraternity. And the actor, William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon. And the author, actor, two capital letter A's again, gives the AA Gemini signature. Brilliant. Don't you think? Thank you.